So let's take a look why so many black people are so unhappy in America. Many would say, well, it's about racism. The white people are so inherently racist and evil, and therefore the black people are not accepted, and therefore they are angry. But is this really true? Is it really about racism? We're gonna take a deeper look at the psychological depth of why black people are not happy in America. So they blame it on slavery, even though slavery was abolished a long time ago. Even the Jim Crow era was done away with. Now we have equal citizenship, equality in every way, even DEI and equal voting rights. Did this make them happy? And why are they still angry? So even though we have a growing tension between black people in the Western nations, not just America, but also Europe, Australia, South Africa, we have to look at the people who lived there before, the European people, and we have to understand what it really is, what they call racism. But before we look at the culture of other peoples like the Chinese, the Indians, and the sub-Saharan Africans, let us take a look first at the history of the European man and the culture that came from it. We're living now in a time where they present us a picture of a utopia where all religions and races and cultures and historical facts are blended together so we can live in some kind of liberal utopia. But if we look beyond the corrupted version of our history and we take a look at where the European people's history truly come from, everything changes and you will gain understanding of what's happening today. Of course, the story of Noah is part of our European history. And we see that Noah was perfect in his genealogy that came from Adam. So Noah has nothing to do with sub-Saharan Africans or Chinese people. We see that the sons of Noah were all Caucasian. And the story of Noah started in the Middle East. But if you read the biblical history, it is mostly talking about the sons of Shem who lived there in the Middle East and the son Ham who went into Egypt. Egypt before it became amalgamated and before sub-Saharan Africans moved in and became amalgamized with the people living there. But there was a third son, Japhet, who traveled all the way to China. That is the reason that we find white, tall mummies with blonde hair all the way into China. And have you ever noticed how even the so-called Wall of China is eerie similar to any old European structure? But I don't want to digress too much because I already made many videos about archaeological and historical facts concerning the European race. One of the most important differences between the white race and the other races was that only from the white race came the great philosophers. Yes, even people like Zarathustra was a white man, even though he was from Persia. But today, when you think of Zarathustra, people think, well, he must have looked Arab because the modern day Persians look Arab. But of course, that is not so. Also, religions like Buddhism and Krishnaism and all these isms, they stemmed from the European people. Even the Sanskrit from India is very similar to European languages. And when you look at historical history from the Scythians, European peoples, which in my opinion were not just Japhites, but also certain sons of Shem were among them. Because you see things like words like Papa, Father, Abba, which all stem from the same source. Of course, Abraham was not the first one who heard about God. the sons of Adam already knew about God. And of course, Noah already knew about God, and he also passed down this knowledge to his sons. And from these sons came the different peoples, and they all produced philosophers. Yes, these were the same people. But even among the Greek philosophers there was differences. Even about the Gnostics from the Middle East there were differences. But we see that, in my opinion, that in the Europeans, the Scythians were not just Shemites or of the lost tribes of Israel, but also people of Japhet were among them. And the people of Japhet, the Scythians, were always called a very noble people, who created laws, who had philosophy and had religions. And he went into places like North India, created a society there. Even philosophers like Nietzsche in the 1800s wrote books about Zarathustra, the man from Persia. No one of our race ever looked at external races for philosophical insight. In sub-Saharan Africa, they did not even have philosophers. People might say, well, Islam has philosophy. Yes, Islam borrowed philosophy that already existed in the Adamic European world. The whole reason that King Alexander of Macedonia conquered the whole Middle East, including Egypt and parts of India, was because back then it was still governed by the Indo-European white race. Even the dream of Daniel. Daniel saw a statue, right? Starting with the Assyrian Babylonians, then the Medo-Persians, then the Greeks, then the Romans. But of course, these different empires were not empires of different races. These were all the Indo-European people who had different empires around that time. But all these people would be united in Christ. Paul even spoke about that there is no difference between the Greeks and the Scythians and the barbarians, because these were all the same people. So even all the Indo-European people, whether they were Shemites or Japhites, they always had their own ideas, their own philosophers, and they were always fighting about who is the most noble, who has the best philosophies, and who can create the best leaderships. That's why there are always these wars among each other. That's why King Alexander overthrew the Persians. That's why the Roman Empire took over the Greek Empire, and so on. But Jesus came to give them the way, the truth, and the life. Paul said, the Judeans look for signs, the Greek look for philosophers, but the truth is in Christ. And hence the European nations became gradually Christian. So what happened to the Indo-European people who lived beyond India? Well, they moved gradually more and more into Europe, and the ones who stayed behind were amalgamized with the Mongolian people. Also in India, people moved away into Europe. The ones who stayed behind became amalgamated with the darker races from the south of India. And the same thing happened in Egypt. Egypt started to become amalgamated, became multicultural, and became a third world country. That's why the Roman Empire was not even interested anymore in the regions east of Palestine, because they were already amalgamated since the time of Alexander. Right? The Roman Empire was still only concerned about the kinsmen. But still, Christ needed to come to unify all the different European peoples. So when we look at Europe, how it developed, the architecture, the buildings, the cathedrals, but not just that, They all had the blood of their forefathers running through their veins. They had the same values that came out of Greek philosophy, out of Christianity, out of all the ancient wisdom that flows through their blood. It was a culture on a deep spiritual level. But not just buildings, European people for thousands of years have sought beauty. They have sought the meaning of life. They have tried to figure out things and develop themselves. And they have a deep love for beauty, just like music. Why is it that European people always had a deep spiritual connection to classical music? And of course, other people can appreciate it and can hear that it is beautiful, but they don't have a deep spiritual connection whenever they look at a cathedral or listen to classical music or watch our art. Because when we as European people walk through our cities, we listen to our music, we see our art, we understand and we remember our forefathers who are still running through our veins. But then you bring people from totally different backgrounds or race into your societies. Of course they cannot conform to this. Of course they don't understand it. Of course they don't feel it. Of course they feel like an outsider. So the globalists had this idea to take down our values as being Christian nations and make our history something that is distant, doesn't really belong to us. They demoralize us and we make ugly art. We make buildings that one size fits all, and we start to create music that everybody can dance to. What we don't understand no more, that a culture is a direct reflection of one's spirit. And every race has a different spirit. Hence, that all different races have different cultures. So what do you do if you bring all these people in of different backgrounds, with different forefathers and different religions and different races? What can you do to make everybody happy? Well, first of all, you're gonna play on the thing that everyone has in common. Because all races want to have food, they want to have shelter, they want to make families, right? So this is what you make most important. But does that mean that a black man with African ancestry drives in a German Mercedes, has a Swiss watch, has an Italian suit, has a French pair of sunglasses, lives in a nice house of brick? Does that mean that he is spiritually also just like you? We now live in a very superficial society where your ancestry, your connection to your forefathers, your connection to your history, your moral values and your bloodlines no longer matter. It's only about outward expression. But the fact that these people also speak English and drive in your cars and then live in the houses of your ancestors, does that make them like you? So we see more and more black people in America living good lives, living in nice houses, driving in nice cars and having decent jobs. And yet these same people are very upset with you. They call you names. Why are they still not happy? Well, that's because there is one thing they cannot get from us. And it is our spirit that goes back 6,000 years. No matter how hard they try, they can on that level never be one of us. Even if we wanted to, we can't do it either. Because a true society, a true people is united through the Spirit. I'm not talking just about the Spirit of Christ, but the blood that runs through our veins. They may copy your behavior, they may speak your language, but they cannot copy that. That's why they call you a racist, for example. Right? So, this is why black people will never truly be happy. And we, putting down our ancestry and our spirit, our very soul of existence, even if we would put it down, they will still not be happy. Because no race will be happy if they identify with someone else's spirit.